Brother Hernan Guadalupe, and Brother Hernan is the co-founder of Hablamos Islam, whose mission is to provide Spanish dawah, which is like a calling to Islam information and education-based resources about Islam in Spanish. Hernan, whose family is from Ecuador, embraced Islam 14 years ago, while earning his bachelor's in mechanical engineering at Stevens Institute of Technology. And subhanAllah, I hope he touches on the date. I just discovered today the date that he became Muslim. Very interesting. He has studied Islamic sciences at the Islamic Learning Foundation and is currently pursuing his bachelor's in Islamic studies from Mishka University. He spent some time in Cairo, Egypt, where he studied and completed the classical Arabic curriculum at the Fajr Center. There's many Muslims here in the States that went to Egypt and studied under the Fajr program, mashallah. He currently resides here in Maryland and is a frequent khatib, or a person who gives sermon on Fridays and lecture in this DMV area. So Brother Hernan, if you just show who you are, mashallah. The man in the middle, alhamdulillah. Our next panelist is Sister Wendy Diaz, and the two, mashallah, are husband and wife, alhamdulillah. Sister Wendy was born in Puerto Rico, Boricua, like me over here, alhamdulillah, and embraced Islam in the year 2000. She is the co-founder of Hablamos Islam, a non-profit outreach program, as mentioned before, in terms of Brother Hernan as well. She's been a writer and translator for over 10 years and is currently working for ICNA, the Islamic Society of North America, and Why Islam. She graduated with honors from the University of Maryland, UMBC, with a degree in modern languages and linguistics, specializing in education. She has studied Arabic in Egypt and in the Islamic Learning Foundation in New York, and Islamic Sciences through Al-Maghrib Institute, Mishka University, Tuba University, and the ICNA Sisters Wing. She has authored and illustrated 7 bilingual Islamic children's books. So many of us were looking for these type of books, so please make sure that you go to Hablamos Islam and purchase those materials. They have videos too, and puppets, really cool, mashallah. So I would encourage you to check those out. Our final panelist is Brother Jamal Abdul Kareem. Mashallah, we've worked a lot together, myself, Brother Jamal. So we're I love him very much, mashallah, for the sake of Allah. Brother Jamal Abdul Kareem has taught elementary, secondary level subjects for more than 40 years. So he's one that I have always looked up to, mashallah. He is also of Cuban descent and originates from Manhattan in New York. He's traveled within the American Virgin Islands and independent Caribbean states, and he has worked extensively in Islamic education within this time period. He earned his associate's, bachelor's, and master's in education from Nassau Community College, New York, in New York University School of Continuing Education and Undergraduate Studies. His graduate studies at Antioch Teachers College, and further educational studies at SUNY Old Westbury in New York. I pronounce Sunni like Islamically, subhanAllah. It's just an inside joke, Muslim joke, Muslim New Yorker joke type of thing. He created, coordinated, and supervised an intergenerational community-based program for middle school youth and senior citizens. And Brother Jamal has also been a daycare center director, and he was the former assistant principal at a Rahmah school outside of Baltimore. He's got a dissertation. So I know we want to get into some other stuff, inshallah. But just, Brother Jamal, again, he's continued to lecture in a number of universities and colleges over the years, and on various topics such as Muslim educational experience, Islam and the youth movement, domestic violence, the African diaspora, and Islam as related to peoples of Latin American origin. So Jazakumullah khair, may Allah reward you all for coming out. We greatly appreciate your time as well. So if we can begin with Brother Hernan, just to share a few thoughts and your experience, inshallah.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Inshallah, I guess the first question was to share how we embrace Islam. I mean, each one of us, inshallah, will be sharing briefly our story. As Brother Jose mentioned, my parents, they migrated from Ecuador in the late 70s, and I was fortunate enough to be born here in the States. And just like many of the Latinos that came to this country, they were looking for that American dream. Alhamdulillah, they raised me in a very, very strong Latino cultural family, and with that came the religious belief of Catholicism. My mother was a fairly religious woman, and she told me as I was growing up that she was even thinking about becoming a nun at some point in her life. My father, on the other hand, he was religious, but I would say more so from the cultural perspective. However, he still practiced his faith as much as he could. As is common in Ecuador, they tend to put their children in private school. So when I was born here, and it was time for me to go to school, they enrolled me in Catholic school. So I actually attended Catholic school from 1st to 8th grade. And so I would say I was a fairly religious child, knowledgeable about Catholicism. I was an altar boy from 4th to 8th grade, so more so than most children, I would say. It came a point in time in my life where I began to ask specific questions and regarding the theology of Catholicism, and there were certain things that I began to look into, and my heart wasn't completely satisfied, pertaining primarily to the concept of the Trinity, Mary as the Mother of God, confession, and certain aspects of Catholicism that I just began to wonder, and I wanted to know more. Just to keep things short, because I know all of us have a lot to talk about, and so after some time I became disenchanted with Catholicism, and I just started searching other things. I had many friends living in a diverse community that had different religious backgrounds, different denominations of Christianity. I had friends who were Hindus, so I learned a little bit about different cultural backgrounds. I even had Muslim friends growing up, but I never knew they were Muslim. They never even told me that they were Muslim. All I knew is that his name was Hassan and the other one's name was Tami. That's all I knew, but they never even told me anything. Fast forward, I went to high school. I started kind of deciding to look more into science and Darwinism and evolution, just because that was really what I was interested in. As Brother Jose said, I'm a mechanical engineer, so science and math was my thing. Finally, when I got to college, I met a friend of mine in my second year of college who was Muslim. His name was Ahmed Sadiq, and he wasn't like a really practicing Muslim, I would say, at least like what we know should be. He was a common youth that you find who was struggling finding his way, but he still had a deep foundation about Islam, and that was his belief. So we used to hang out with him, me and my other friends. We would hang out, and we would just have hangout sessions, and we would start talking about different things and debating about religion, government and politics, sports, whatever the case may be. And during the conversations, especially from the religious and the political ones, he would always bring it from the side of Islam, from the Islamic point of view. So I began to learn about who Allah was from the Islamic point of view, who God was from the Islamic point of view, who Jesus was, who Mary was from the Islamic point of view. He also talked a lot about the signs of the day of judgment, and this kind of got me really interested in learning a little bit more so than my other friends in that circle. And there was a point in time where I asked him for a Quran to read, and I began little by little reading about Islam, more so independently. And I came to a conclusion that if I ever wanted to be religious, that I would become Muslim, because Islam was clear cut. There was no mystery about it. There was no twist to it. It was just straightforward. You asked a question, here's the answer, and it was real clear, especially on those principles that I had, difficulty understanding, Trinity and Jesus and concept of God, etc. They were clear to me, and from the Islam perspective, I understood fully who they were and our purpose as human beings, what our purpose was. However, being in college, being away from my family, I was kind of caught up in that college lifestyle, so I decided I would do it when I get older. Once I get older, I'll accept Islam. I went to college at Stevens Institute of Technology, and if anybody knows where Hoboken, New Jersey, it's literally right across the river from Manhattan, actually lower Manhattan. So this one day, as I was telling Brother Jose, I woke up and and the way I tell this, it was a beautiful day, and I went to class. Actually, I went to class. It was my chemistry lab class. I woke up at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I came to find out that my class was canceled. I got up, cleaned up, went to class. It was canceled, and I started walking back. If you ever look at pictures of Stevens or ever get a chance to go there, there's a place called Castle Point. And Castle Point actually faces Lower Manhattan, so you can actually see the Twin Towers from that point. So if you think about it, my college career, I would walk past the skyline, New York skyline, every single day. This day was no different. This day, I walked past it, looked at the buildings, no problem. As soon as I walked into my room, I got a phone call from a friend of mine and said, turn on the TV, that the World Trade Center is on fire. The World Trade Center is on fire. I just walked past it and everything was fine. So lo and behold, I turned on the TV, and yes, apparently 2 planes crashed into these buildings. I immediately ran downstairs to my friend Ahmed, woke him up, and told him, hey man, this is what's going on. And he got dressed real quick, and we went outside to the point and started looking and watching this crazy event happen on September 11th. So I watched everything that happened that day from Castle Point, and to give you like a real perspective, Castle Point is literally like half a mile away. Like if the Hudson River is really not that wide in hindsight, you can swim from one end to another if you can make it. So it's really, really close. So think about it, if you can imagine just watching everything from just the other side of the river. So like at probably like around 10 o'clock, 10:20, 10:30, finally the building gave in and collapsed. So I'm watching this whole time, and the building finally collapses, and in my mind I began to start thinking about all the things I learned about Islam, the concept of Allah, the concept of God, who Jesus was, who Mary was, what our role is in this life, and what happens to those who believe and disbelieve. And it came at that point, I didn't really want to continue to live with that thought that I'll wait until I get older. I'll wait until I become a grandfather to come and become more religious, etc. But I didn't really know what to do. It was just more of a thought. And my friend actually tapped me on the shoulder. Ahmed tapped me on my shoulder, and he said, listen, I'm going to go pray, because right now I need some type of comfort. I'm going to go pray. And I immediately turned to him and I said, I'm going to go with you. I went with him to his room. He showed me how to make wudu, how to make ablution, how to wash. He told me how to say shahada, how to proclaim shahada, which is the declaration of faith. It's what you say to become a Muslim. And I took shahada that day. And I prayed my first prayer with him shortly after I watched those buildings collapse. Now people ask me, like, why did you accept Islam that day? Like, why that day? I mean, supposedly Muslims did this event and etc. For me, up to that point, I knew that Islam didn't promote, these atrocities. For me, I knew that Islam was to believe and worship the Creator of the heavens and the earth alone, and that if you fulfilled your part as a Muslim, then there is a great reward for you. And alhamdulillah, that day I also realized that we're not promised tomorrow. As a young guy, I was only 20 years old when it happened. I thought that life would go on forever. But that day, for some reason, I knew that people woke up with that same mentality. However, their destiny proved otherwise. What God decreed for them was a different story than what they imagined their life would be. I thought about the people that were there, who potentially had families, who were going to go have lunch with their coworkers, or dinner with their family members, or take their kid to practice, or whatever the case may be, whatever their day was going to end. But it didn't, because God decreed something else. And for me, I felt that I don't want to postpone anything, because it might be that there's a different plan than what I had planned. So I decided, alhamdulillah, to embrace Islam that day and continue my life as a Muslim. So that's alhamdulillah how I entered into Islam. I didn't mean to make it real depressing, but that's just what happened. And to maybe lighten up the mood, alhamdulillah, I actually went home that weekend and told my parents that I became Muslim, and they actually were very, very supportive. And my brother, although initially he didn't want anything to do with it, a month later he actually embraced Islam. And 2 years later, my mother embraced Islam. And then after constant conversation and dawah with my father, 10 years later, he actually embraced Islam. So my whole immediate family are Muslims, as well as a cousin of mine, actually 3 cousins of mine embraced Islam, but one of them is the only one that actually admits that she's a Muslim. The other 2, I don't know, and it's between them and God. But alhamdulillah, you know, it was an event, and to be honest, and I think we'll talk about this, but regardless of what the media portrays that event as, it was actually a blessing in disguise in my point of view, because many people, not just myself, many more people embraced Islam after that event than any other time that I know of. I mean, statistically, they mentioned that between 20 to 20,000 Americans would embrace Islam each year, and then the numbers spiked up right after those events to 100,000. So it's awkward how an event like this can cause to spark curiosity in the hearts of man and the hearts of human beings, and many of them up to this day are embracing Islam at an escalating rate. So, regardless of what that caused, there's a hidden blessing in it, and if you look at it through a specific lens, you'll actually see it. And I think that's the reason that I'm here now. So.
Thank you very much, Brother Hernan. One of the things, just to touch quickly, is that a lot of times we don't hear the Muslim voice and the Muslim reaction to 9/11. It's just assumed that, as what's put out there, everybody was happy and all this kind of negative stuff, or these people embraced Islam because they hate America. And actually it's the opposite. And I know for myself, I used to work at a Huda school, which is here in College Park, on 9/11. And our experiences, subhanAllah, are very different when it comes to embracing the people who embraced Islam before 9/11, the ones who embraced Islam on 9/11, and those after 9/11. I think all of our histories are a little bit different, and you'll get a taste of that. But I think it's very important for all of us to really know and appreciate, how saddened many of us were, how fearful many of us were. We're going through a lot of the same emotions as everybody else on that day. And I know for myself, I'm a history buff and all that kind of thing. I'm thinking we're going to get interned, just like the Japanese were, after World War II. There were all kind of things going through our minds at that time. So there was a lot of emotion that day that I think we felt just like, any other person here at that time. So thank you for sharing that very, from the heart story. Jazakallah khair. We'll move, inshallah, to Sister Wendy. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I embraced Islam in the year 2000, which was a year before the tragedy of September 11th. The way that I came to know Islam, first, I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, and I was there until about the age of 8. During that time, I used to attend Catholic school. I learned all about Catholicism, and then later on, my father actually joined the U.S. Army, and he moved our family to the U.S. So during that time that we moved, we came to live in Texas, and while we were there, my parents continued to take my brother and I to Sunday school so that we can learn about our religion, Catholicism. But even as a young girl, I never felt comfortable with the Catholic Church. I couldn't quite understand some of the teachings, and I didn't feel comfortable anytime that I went into a church. As a young girl, I felt scared. I felt that it wasn't a welcoming place, and I couldn't understand why there were images and statues and a bloody statue of representation of who was supposed to be Jesus Christ on a cross in front of where the priest would give the sermons and all of the standing and the bowing, and I didn't understand what any of it had to do with the actual core teachings of Christianity. So as time went on, my family had to move from place to place, as is often the case with military families. My parents became detached from the Catholic Church and detached from religion altogether. They used to maybe celebrate Christmas, but other than that, religion didn't really play a huge role in their lives. My mother always told me to pray every day. She said, I always pray at night, and she said, you don't necessarily have to go to church to worship God. So that was the mentality that we had up until we finally moved again to the state of Georgia. And as I grew older, moving became more and more difficult for me. So once I got into my teenage years, I felt that I needed to reaffirm my relationship with God and have a spiritual path to follow. So once my family and I moved to Maryland, and we actually moved here to Maryland, I met one friend of mine whose father was a pastor. And he was a pastor at a non-denominational Christian church. By this time, I knew that I believed in God, and I wanted to go to church or to go to a place where I felt at home. However, I did not want to be Catholic. I didn't want to be Catholic. And one of my objections to Catholicism was the images inside the churches. And when this friend of mine reached out to me and she said, why don't you come with us to my family's church? I told her immediately, I don't want to go to church because I don't agree with the things that happen inside the church. And she said, well, what kind of things? And I said, I don't believe in images. And she told me, in my church, there are no images. And I was shocked. I said, this was the first time that I was being told about a different denomination of Christianity. So I told her, so explain to me how it is. She said, the church is just a room, there's no images, it's just a cross on the wall, and that's it. So I agreed with going to the church for once. I said, I'll go once to see how it is. So I started to go to that church with her. But during this time, I also met a friend that was in one of my classes in high school, and I was a junior at this time. And when I saw this friend of mine, I had moved from Maryland. I had moved from Georgia to Maryland, and in Georgia, everything is very, very black and white. And there weren't that many Latinos or Hispanics living where I was living in Georgia. It was a small town there. So I always felt a bit out of place. So when I was in Maryland, I started to meet other people from different cultures, and one friend of mine that used to sit very close to me in one of my classes, I thought that she was Hispanic because she looked Hispanic. And so I asked her one day, where are you from, or where is your family from? And she said, I'm Egyptian. And I was shocked. This is the first time I came across someone from Egypt. So I asked her, okay, so you're Egyptian, tell me about that. How is that? What is that like? And what's your country like and everything? I started hanging out with her more and more. And as I met her family members, then I realized that they followed a different religion. And that religion was Islam. I saw that her mother used to wear a head covering. And so I started asking her questions. What do you believe in? And why do you pray this way? Or what does this mean? And there were certain stereotypes that we all, were exposed to growing up. Why is it that the women has to stand behind the men, or why do they have to pray behind the men? And so these type of questions kept coming. At the same time, I was going to a Christian church, and I was seeing from one angle the Muslim people were very good people. They were praying every day. They were praying multiple times a day, and they were such good people. And then I saw on my other friend's side that she had this Christian family, and I was attending this Christian church, and I felt like it was a good place for me socially because a lot of my friends were there. So I asked the pastor, my friend's father, what is going to happen to people that don't believe in Jesus as their Lord and Savior? Because this was the teaching of that particular church. And he said, well, if they don't believe that, then they're going to go to hell. So that was a bit hard to swallow at that time because I was very good friends with my Egyptian friend. And how can I compromise with these two? So what I did was I tried to call my Egyptian friend and tell her to come with me to church because I wanted to save her soul. And she actually came once, but just to support, I guess support me in my search. But I didn't feel satisfied with the answer that the pastor gave about, I also asked him, so does that mean that all of the Jewish people that died during the Holocaust and other people, does that mean that they went to hell? And he said yes. And it was just so cold. And so eventually my family had to move again. And after I moved to a new place, I was a senior in high school, and it was very depressing to be a senior and not know anyone. So my parents used to let me come back to Maryland to visit my Egyptian friend, who I became closer to than my other friend. Now, during this time that I was visiting her, I would always continuously ask more and more questions about Islam, to the point that her father told me, you're annoying me with all your questions. I'm going to give you some books so you can just read on your own. Here, I'm going to give you the Quran, and I'm going to give you this other book, and you can just read. So this is what I started doing while I was living in Georgia. I started reading about Islam, and the more and more I read, the more I started to understand and make sense of it. The first book that I read was called, it was Jesus in Islam versus Christianity. So I started reading about Jesus' role in Islam, and it made more sense to me than what I had learned in Catholicism and in Christianity. So after I read that book, I was convinced, absolutely convinced, that Islam was the religion that I should follow. And so I decided to embrace Islam, and it was about August of the year 2000 when I took my shahada.
MashaAllah. So again, every Muslim you talk to is a different story. Not all of them are these fantastical. I know somebody that had these dreams and stuff like that, and then most of us is just a regular old thing. You meet somebody and things like that. So mashallah. But every story, I know when we talk about it, it brings back those emotions, because that's, at least for myself, and I think I could probably speak for everybody, like the most emotional time and the happiest moment is that day that we took our shahada, where we declared our faith. Brother Jamal, inshallah, if you can also share, please.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen wa salatu wa salam ala kitab wa mursalin Sayyidina Muhammad wa barik wa salam. I'll try and keep it short as I can condense it. Yes, similar to Brother Hernan and Sister Wendy, my background as I began a pursuit of discovery about it, my father was a Jesuit Catholic, and his family came out of Cuba. And they settled, in Florida initially, like many Latino people do from the different Caribbean islands in the Americas. And they came there. For me, as far as being exposed to a religion, Catholicism, and things like that, there was no compulsion to do it. My father was basically reserved in keeping that to himself, but he believed in religion. My mother was the more proactive one with that. However, neither my mother nor my father forced my sisters and I to go to any church, this one or that one, except earlier on. We come out of the urban centers of New York City, in Manhattan on the Lower East Side, and there, if you travel to New York, you see there is a great diversity of people from all different places. It's what they call the melting pot, at least on the East Coast. So in Manhattan, I was exposed primarily, the main religious body of individuals that I was exposed to were Jewish people. There are many Jews who live there in the Lower East Side, Delancey Street, Orchard Street. This is a polyglot of people who live there. And of course, the Latino population is there, primarily from Puerto Rico, places like this. And that's what I was exposed to as far as the diversity of people there. In the interim period, though, my family, in an effort to give us some basis of religion, they took us to a church, not a Baptist church, not a Methodist church, not a Christian Catholic church. They took us to an interdenominational church. And many different people were there. There were many Easterners who came there, Jews, African American people, Latinos, everybody. It was just a church where they felt they could kind of blend the different spirit of belief. There was no indoctrination, compulsive indoctrination of believing that Jesus was the Son of God. And in fact, they kind of left that out of the equation. So for me as a child, being exposed to that was setting me up for pursuing religion. What was spirituality? What did it mean to believe in a deity, God, if you will? The next step, quickly, is that was the segue for me to go to really begin to pursue religion, understanding of what we call religion, but the lifestyle of Islam. Because as a young man in my mid-teens, by the 1960s, I had come in contact with Muslims. At that time, Nation of Islam was very prevalent. And I had opportunity to be in the city and had cousins that had gone into the Nation of Islam and different things like this. But for myself, it was studying, was just looking academically at what was happening. Sociopolitically, though, with political conscience, I was growing up in the civil rights era. So for me, at that time, the proactivity of demonstration in the war in Vietnam, which many of us went, and fought in as veterans in Vietnam. The thing was that I had the opportunity to see men like Malcolm X, Haj Malik Shabazz, and he was a dynamic individual. And this took place in the city streets of New York and Harlem, which I would commonly frequent based on where my relatives lived, where they were located in the urban centers. As time went on, in studying and looking and coming in contact with Muslims themselves, I was able to decide for myself that, well, this seems like a uniform belief system. It's different from saying Jesus was the Son of God and Mary is his mother, which I never really embraced. I never, similar to what Sister Wendy was saying, I never really had a good feeling about that because it didn't make sense. And when I approached a reverend in church about it and asked him to explain it to me, he couldn't give me an adequate reasoning for it. So that just sparked another level of intellectually trying to understand it. Anyway, Islam as it is appeals to the intellect. As time went on through the latter 60s, of course, there were the movements that were going on. You had the Black Panthers who were looking at liberation of African American people and people in general in color. But then on the East Coast in particular, the Panthers took place, and that all went on in the West Coast primarily. But on the East Coast, down in the Barrios, where my family members lived, you had the Young Lords organization, which was established by Latino brothers and sisters, and they also were looking in a similar platform for liberation and education of people and agitating people to look at their roots. And so, these different organizations were influential in my own shaping and my political consciousness in terms of how I went. By the late 1960s now, I was deciding as a young man, being graduated out of school and going and beginning college. This is where now, being in the college environment, similar to the brother and sister here, Brother Hernan, and also Sister Wendy, that I came in contact more and more with Muslims, and they began to really have conversations with me, because I was asking questions, what is this, what is that, what do you think? And one of the brothers, he had said that he was Muslim, his name and this, that, and the other thing, and I served the creator of the atom. And it's like, something went off in my head, and just that one thing just stuck, and I started thinking about it, and I said, what kind of being could it be that would create the atom? You can't even see the atom. I had never thought about this before. Consequently, in the early 70s now, I am married, I have family, and now I was coming more and more in contact. I was living in Brooklyn, and at that point in time, an acquaintance of mine who lived with me for a short time had a friend, and this friend happened to be Muslim, and he began to talk with me as we had contact, and began to explain the pillars of Islam, which consequently I was familiar with. I never had gone into the Nation of Islam or was really interested in it per se because I just didn't like the regimentation. I felt that a person should be free thinking, not regimented in that way. So it didn't appeal to me, except some minor things. Long story short, finally, the brother whose name was Umar at that time, he taught me, gave me literature, read hadith to me, read Quran to me. He would spend, and I finally went to the masjid. And lo and behold, when I finally went to one of the masjid, this was Jamal which Brother Jose's in-law happened to also go to attend at that time, Sheikh Saeed Ali, who is an in-law to him. I came to that masjid and I began to get teaching, sitting, going to the halakas they had, but it wasn't there that I took my shahada. I wound up working in a daycare center in Bushwick, and at least 85% of the people there were from different areas like Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, Puerto Rico, Cuba, and so I was always around this element, and that was for me enhancing my own understanding of who I was, as a person growing up in America, in the United States. Lo and behold, the last stop I wound up was at a masjid that's located down in downtown Brooklyn, And that was a masjid that was established by Dawood Faiso and the American mission that was there, State Street Masjid it was called. And that is where I met Saeed Adli, and that he was the one who at that time, based on the information I had and the willingness, he gave me my shahada. So I had become Muslim in the early 70s at that time, and from there on, I began to pursue more understanding about it, especially in the narrative of being, Latino, having a Latino background. I wanted to know about that, and then I began to come in contact with other brothers and sisters who had also embraced Islam and who were Latino, let alone, being African American person of color. So this is how I came into Islam, from that era, which was very dynamic, civil rights era, seeing such men as Hajj Malik and other large figures who loomed large at the time. So that was my journey to the deen.
Thank you very much, everybody, for sharing. And just, one thing that I think that we all can maybe appreciate from the three talks is that, sometimes I think many assume that, we leave a certain religion and join another religion because we're ignorant of, the beliefs and teachings. And I think you can see that, and for myself included, it was a very intellectual, discussion, debate amongst ourselves. We tried to learn. I was also very religious growing up as well. I wanted to be a priest until 8th grade. I went to Catholic high school as well. So I think for all of us, it's something that, it was a conscious decision, an educated and informed decision. So it was an intellectual and a spiritual, journey all at once. So we have a few questions that revolve around this idea of like Islamic culture, Latino culture, the compatibility of it or not and whatnot. So if any of you can maybe touch on, either the historical compatibility or just yourselves, like during holidays and all these type of things, how that's gone for you and your family in terms of this, this merging now of these identities. Any one of you?
As Brother Jose mentioned initially when in his presentation or the introduction, there is a strong historical connection between Islam and Latinos. There is no doubt that there is an imprint that you find in Latino culture from that which was left from the time of Islamic Spain. You can find it from our language, some of the food that we eat, some of our just customs. And today, as a matter of fact, my wife talked about some of the dichos that we have, or the how do you translate dichos?
Sayings.
Sayings, yeah, like these proverbs that we say, and they have it's Islamic context or Muslim context behind it. And one of them she mentioned today, which was I was actually trying to find out where did she hear that from? Where it was how's it go? Si la montaña no viene a Mahoma, Muhammad se va a la montaña. So it translates, if the mountain doesn't come to Muhammad, Muhammad goes to the mountain. And she said that her mother told her that, and I was like, where did she hear that from? And it's something that it's passed on, and the fact that you have that in your culture, it's just you just can't deny that. You can't deny it. And the biggest thing I think is the language. I mean, I'm not really familiar with the numbers, and maybe Wendy could touch upon that more because she's really into language and linguistics. But there's a high percentage of Spanish words that come from Arabic. And for myself, the biggest thing for me is the bonds of family. And that's something that for me, I find my family, they're very, very close. We have cousins and uncles all live in one building in Ecuador. That's a thing that's very, very common in Ecuadorian culture, where kids don't leave the house, they just move into a different apartment in the building. And I see the bonds that you find within the Muslim communities, primarily not because of just cultural aspects, but because Islam encourages that. You find the many verses in the Quran that specify the importance of treating your parents kindly. And there's one verse that specifically says, لا تشركوا به شيئا وبالوالدين إحسانا. It says Allah's mentioned in the Quran, don't commit shirk, or don't associate partners with Allah, with God, and treat your parents kindly. Treat them with ihsan, with the highest level of kindness, not just kindness, but the highest level of kindness. And this is something that's passed down from, through Islam, and mashallah, it's something that I find within the Latino community, culture.
Anything else? Anybody else want to touch on that? Or?
Yes. Assalamu alaikum. I had jotted some things down, but the thing is, like, if you know the different foods, plantanos, if you know sazon or adobo, if you have that in your kitchen, or a plantain press, or if you had, like, when I was a child, one of the things that instead of candy, my father would bring caña, and we'll eat the caña, split it down and suck on that all day. Or you have caña juice, you have juice that's made from sugar cane, which is refreshing. So you have these different things, you're eating tamarinds, or you're eating quenebras, or something like this. These are the foods that, I was exposed to. Or you have arroz y gandules. You're having these different foods. Food culture in and of itself amongst Latinos, has this other end between Caribbean blends and also vestiges of what came from the Islamic world in terms of the way certain things were consumed, especially peoples that were colonized by Europeans, and that's the Spanish incursion when they came into different areas of the Americas and the islands, and when they came to Central America and in South America, even in Mexico. So these are things that people brought with them, but these blends of the culture. The other thing you might look at when you do the historical study is how when the Spaniards came into the Americas and began to settle, like in St. Augustine, Florida, or areas of Arizona, in these areas, or what became known as New Mexico, and later on the West Coast in California, they began to build in certain styles which reflected the Muslim architecture that they brought with them from Al-Andalus, actually from Spain. Even the name, Hispanics, the whole idea, you might say Hispanic because we were growing in number, but the Hispanics, the whole thing that Hispaniola was the old name for Spain, one of the old names for Spain. So you look at that and how this development went on, and then you see the blends of the culture, the people who are African, the people who are European, Native American peoples, First Nations of people who blended, and then from there on began a unique culture. Lingua franca, of course, of the Spanish-speaking peoples is Spanish, but then there are other added terminology and things, as Brother Hernan was saying, that find their way into everyday colloquialisms, even that so-called English people are saying, like things like alcohol, cotton, things like this, syrup, and these kinds of terms come out of the genre of the way that the people who were speaking Spanish out of Spain came. So they brought that culture with them. So those are the parts of the highlights when you do the study historically that gives you an understanding of what the connection is with Islam. SubhanAllah.
Just to share a little bit of our experience, Eid, which is the Islamic holidays, we have two holidays during the year. Eid in our house is like hype. Okay, like it's Puerto Rican Eid. So typically, if Christmas, you would have a roasted pig. That's what is typical in Puerto Rican culture, right? You have the pernil or lechon, right? Asado, and they would spend all day roasting it. So we just Islamicize it. So we have roasted lamb. Right, it's the same flavors. Everything else is the same. Arroz con gandules, or rice and beans, whatever it is, type of a thing. And instead of maybe an Arab drum, we might have congas or whatever going. It's the same. It's essentially the same thing. We just SubhanAllah, it's not that difficult. It's not necessarily that you have to depart from who you are in order to embrace something. And I think family-wise, at least on our side, both sides of the family are both Puerto Rican, alhamdulillah. So it's been pretty easy for us to be able to do that. One other thing that I've noticed also is that from going to Puerto Rico, at least every town, and I wonder if it's similar in like Ecuador or Cuba, every town when they did their civic planning, back in the colonial times, there was a La Plaza in the middle of the city, and in the plaza there's usually like a park in the middle. And then you had a church on one side, you had like the city government building on one side, and you had like other things on the other side. And then the city was built outside. From there, everything branches out. So all the streets kind of go from there. And every city that I've been to, at least in Puerto Rico, the church is facing east. In every town, I went to about 4 or 5 just to make sure, because I heard this and I wasn't sure if it was true. There's got to be something to that. I mean, it's just not coincidence that these type of things happen. So there are links that are hidden. And again, this is the beauty of these type of talks, is that you get to see how some of those connections are there. Moving on to another question. So we mentioned like kind of the ease of some of those connections of, becoming Muslim, Islamic culture. What were some of the challenges and difficulties that you may have faced, or maybe you didn't, but that you may have faced in becoming Muslim and having to navigate through some of those differences religiously?
Some of my friends at the time when I accepted Islam, they were not very good influences. So some of them wanted, and I accepted Islam right before I turned 21. So when my birthday came around, they started calling and saying, now you're legal, meaning you can drink, and let's go to a club and let's do this and that. And so I had to excuse myself and say, no, I can't do that because I'm Muslim. And I also remember someone once said to me, how can you be Muslim when you're from Puerto Rico? So speaking about Puerto Rico,
it's hard.
And I was recently reading about the reason why in Puerto Rico pork is so widely consumed. And there's actually history behind that. It's not a coincidence that in Puerto Rico pork is such a staple. And the thing is that what we have to understand is that when Christopher Columbus came to the Americas, it was only, and he quote-unquote discovered America, it was only a year after the Muslims were expelled from the last stronghold in Granada in Spain. Meaning that during the time that Christopher Columbus was coming and the people were colonizing the Americas, the Inquisition was also happening. And the Inquisition, what they wanted to do was the church wanted to find out which of the people in Spain were still practicing Islam because they were being expelled. So either you stay in Spain or you have to convert to Christianity. So there were forced conversions happening, and one of the ways that the Inquisition was to find out who was pretending to be a Christian when in reality they were still practicing Islam. So one of the things that they used to do is they would bring someone that was accused of practicing Islam, they would bring him into a place, they would serve him dinner, and they would put pork in front of the person. So what they would do is if the person showed any type of disgust or aversion to the pork, or they didn't want to eat it, they refused, then they said then this person is a heretic. They would either be expelled or they would be killed. So this same type of mentality was brought to Puerto Rico. So when the people were coming from Spain, they had to kind of pass a test to see if they were indeed loyal to the Catholic Church. And one of the ways that people would prove their loyalty to the Catholic Church was by consuming pork. So in Puerto Rico, pork was served with just everything, every single meal, and this is why it is so popular to eat pork in Puerto Rico. So, but as far as me personally, I didn't feel that practicing Islam was a challenge. Alhamdulillah, everything became easy. The only thing that was difficult was after September 11, my parents didn't want me to wear hijab because they didn't want me to be attacked or stereotyped or anything like this. So this was the difficulty in my life after becoming a Muslim for about a year or so, that my parents would not allow me to wear the headscarf, and I would actually have to put the scarf in my purse when I went out, put it on when my parents didn't know, and then take it off when I came home. And that was my struggle in the beginning, but alhamdulillah, things got better after that.
And also, it was Jews too, Muslims and Jews in Spain who were forced to eat pork and whatnot. And interestingly, the Jews who were also expelled, they fled to Muslim countries because they knew how welcome they were in Islamic Spain. So when they fled to Turkey, they fled to Morocco, they fled to Palestine. So you get to see how things have changed so much, and it doesn't have to be that way. Anybody else want to touch on this?
It's similar, when studying indigenous cultures in the country in the Americas. You find, especially indigenous and African Americans, you know, they eat much pork, much pork. That was one of the things that, like, in coming into Islam, you know, just changing your eating habits alone, and then there's certain things you will not do. You won't drink, you won't have beer, you won't have wine, you won't have, you know, vino, you won't have any of those things. Hard alcoholic drinks, you're not partying as much. You lose your friends. Some of your friends you lost. In my case, you know, my so-called friends I grew up with, that I knew very well all my life, you know, I stopped hanging around with them, but they consciously made a choice not to hang around with me as frequently anymore. You know, their sense of trust or their feeling of, and they would make snide jokes or remarks, you know, he's religious, you know, like this. Only one other friend who, rahimahullah, he's deceased now, also came into the deen through a different vein, though he had been in the Nation of Islam. He was the only other friend that I had at the time who also went through those same struggles and difficulties, and then as he reverted back to the proper understanding of his deen, you know, we were still very good friends during that same time period. But many things change in terms of your understanding, and therefore your orientation begins to also change in terms of doing different habitual things that are accepted of you, that are expected of you. And adjusting to that sometimes poses its own difficulty and challenges, you know, when a person comes into the deen because it's alien, or they figure it's alien. And one of the other things that was said, well, you know, you don't have to, you're saying that you're Muslim, but you know, you have to follow away those Arab people. And say, well, you know, the fact of the matter is that not all Muslims are Arab, and not all Arabs are Muslim. You know, so therefore you get the context of looking at things in a broader perspective in terms of the change and the challenges that you have to go through, and what you're willing. People will test you. You know, are you going to make salat? Are you going to pray when the activities in the family are going on? Do you go away, step up, which I wound up doing, or you just leaving the house for hours and then coming back later on after I've been to the masjid? So that's where some of the things begin to alter, and then characteristically, this is where you find, you know, you're tested, and this is where you begin to find your strength in terms of sticking to the principles of Islam and not letting it be challenged in the way that you would give it up.
So just, I want to ask maybe one broad question, and then we'll open it up to the audience as well. So now moving forward, you know, one of the questions was asking about being that you're first generation Muslims, and actually we have some second generation and even third generation. You know, my father-in-law, he became Muslim in the 70s, and then there's my wife, she would be the second, and then we have a third generation of my children, Latino Muslims. But, you know, so where do we see, you know, Latino American Islam going? Where are things happening when it comes to this idea, you know, nationally about Islam in America? I mean, we even have, you know, Hispanic TV here today to cover this, because it is, you know, something that's now in the limelight. So if some of you can share, I know there's a lot of things going on around the country historically and now moving forward. So if you can share some of those things as well.
The movement or the movement that is occurring now within the Latino community, the Muslim Latino community is I would say at an all-time high right now. Previously, there were communities, and everybody knows Alianza is one of the pioneers of this idea of having a Muslim Latino community. And this is way before my time. Probably Brother Jamal even knows more about this. But moving forward to our time right now, there is a lot of effort from Latino Muslims who are doing their best to try to educate Latinos about Islam. There are communities that have that are predominantly Latinos that are coming together to disseminate information. And originally I'm from New Jersey, and the community that I was from, it has a very strong Latino community, Muslim Latino community, who are doing what they can to have events, to educate the community around there. Same thing with Houston and Texas. There's organizations that have come about, Labo, Islam in Spanish. Even we have an organization, Hablamos Islam, doing what we can to promote education, conversation, build resources. So I think it's going in the right direction, and there's a lot more effort right now, especially it's reaching into into the laps of many people, primarily because of the advancement in technology. Social media has been a huge means of communicating with people now, and I think it's going in the right direction. I still think we're still far away from where I think it could be. A lot of us as Latinos lack real profound Islamic education. I think that's the biggest challenge. We don't have high-level Islamic scholars or primary Latinos. You know, hands down, you can name a few of them who've had the blessing of studying overseas, that you can even say he's a sheikh or even, you know, a scholar. I know one, you know. So this is something that needs to change. There's few brothers who have gone to study overseas a couple years, 1 or 2 years, and it's only one of them compared to the millions of Latinos that are in America, let alone, you know, non-Muslim Latinos that are in America. So there is a big challenge ahead, but I think there is a huge effort going forward, and I do see things in a positive light, and I believe that if there was a means of unifying the Latino communities and being able to build something for a greater cause, that would be the absolute best. And for me, I was talking with Jamal right now, is one of the things and challenges now is having Muslims from that are traditionally Muslim, talking about Muslims from Africa or Muslims from Arab descent, etc., who are primarily Muslim, embrace Latinos who are new to their community, giving them the resources that they need, and provide that support for them to start building or organizing themselves to start giving dawah, and calling their neighbors to learning about Islam. Not necessarily, we're not a faith that imposes Islam on somebody, as we know that Islam teaches us there's no compulsion in religion, but at least a way to be able to disseminate information. I think that's a big need, but it's definitely moving forward in the right direction.
Well, one of the encouraging things that I've seen, like my father-in-law and others in New York were part of Alianza Islamica and getting it started and whatnot and serving the Latino Muslim community, is that now we're starting to see a lot of the younger groups, you know, younger than me, you know, like Hernan and Wendy and those even younger, who are serious about trying to study, serious about trying to establish institutions, serious about trying to organize, and really having a broad view of how to teach people about Islam. So having it, whether it be in Spanish, for those who are new immigrants, to those who are catered towards, you know, Latino Americans who maybe aren't, you know, bilingual per se or have that much of attachment, but it's still different, you know, addressing the Latino American community. So, you know, I personally am seeing this revival of the effort, and this is where it's going to be really important for everybody that's out here to continue to pray, first of all, and to continue to support some of those movements that are going on right now across the country, so that we can see things move to the next level. And one of the things that's been very positive also is that, as Hernan has mentioned, that the immigrant community, Muslim community, has started now to be a little bit more open also to others, you know, who have converted, when for a long time it was kind of like an afterthought, or, you know, it's fine if we're the flavor of the month, that's okay, you know, as long as we get some help and funding and support and resources, you know, we'll take care of it from there. But it's good that actually they're opening their eyes and allowing us to, and empowering us a little bit more as well. So I see a lot of positives in that direction. Any questions from the audience? Yes.
I was just wondering, is the Islamic community that you belong to in your mosque, are they open? Like, how open are they to having like a Latino who's
So the question is, for the communities that we attend specifically, how open have they been towards Latinos and Latino Muslims?
As I mentioned before, any community that I've gone to, they are welcoming. They have their arms completely open, and they love the fact that anybody who embraces Islam, they love them for the sake of Allah immediately. And Latinos are no different. And as I mentioned before, living in New Jersey, the majority of my life. That community primarily is made of Latinos and Arabs. That's primarily who lives in Union City, North Bergen, that area. So many of them have been influenced by their Arab neighbors and have accepted Islam. And they have been welcomed. They are encouraged to participate. And I was mentioning is there's a strong dawah organization that the masjid holds that encourages Latinos to come and participate, to organize events primarily catered to Latinos. There's a Latino Muslim Day that they have like every October. There's classes for Latinos in Spanish. I myself used to teach a class there years ago, and it was encouraged by the director, the religious directors there. Numerous brothers that are there that are actively participating. There's a new masjid that's in an adjacent neighborhood that is also encouraging that cause. So it's very welcoming. I've never met any masjid or heard of any masjid that shuns anybody from that, and I really don't think that would be the case.
And masjid, just so you know, masjid and mosque, is the English translation for masjid is mosque. Anybody else wanted to touch on that or similar experience?
When we mentioned our stories of how we accepted Islam, I try to be as brief as possible, but I missed out on some important points. One of the things was that before I actually met my Muslim friend, I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, and I also watched the movie of Malcolm X, and I was very passionate about the civil rights movement. And living in Georgia, as I said, things were seemed to be very black and white. You were either black or you were white, and if you were Latina, you kind of just had to find your way through that. And I did identify more with minorities because as a Latina, I was a minority as well. So I was inclined to befriend and learn about Black history and have African American friends. So one of the things that I experienced while I was living in Georgia and I was trying to find my spiritual path, is that I went to, my father and I, we drove past these two churches every day. And I told my father, I think I want to try to go to church again. This was after I had moved from here back down to Georgia. And so my father said, okay, I'll take you. And my father and I, we went to, there were two churches side by side. One of them was a very new church. It was nice, it looked nice outside. And then the other one it looked very old. So I think this must be the same church, but this was the old building, and they must have moved to this new one that looked much nicer. So when we went, we parked, my father and I, we decided to go into the new one. The old one looked like it was abandoned. And we walked inside, and they actually happened to be in the middle of the Sunday service. And we walked in, and everyone kind of turned around and looked at us. And one man, he got up quickly and he came to us and he said, if you're looking for the black church, it's over there. And we realized that everyone in the church was white, and they saw us. And my father is a bit darker than I. He's of Afro Spanish ancestry. So we were escorted out of the white church, and that was a very, very bitter moment in my life. We actually did go to the other church, and we were welcomed there by the pastor and his family, and it was nice to see that. But after that, I had a bad taste in my mouth, so I didn't want to go back to church again after that. So what I'm trying to say is, in Islam, when you go into a mosque, the beautiful thing about Islam, and I'm not saying that this is I don't want to insult, the other religions, because I know all other religions, in their essence, they're tolerant and inclusive. They should be, but it's not necessarily practiced that way. But in Islam, you see, when you go to any mosque, you'll see people praying side by side. It doesn't matter what color they are, what their background is, if they're rich, if they're poor, if they're Latino, if they're non-Latino, if they're Latino that speaks Spanish or one that doesn't speak Spanish. Whatever social class, whatever race, whatever background, it doesn't matter. You take your shoes off when you go in, you stand side by side, you put your foot next to the person next to you, and you pray together in unison. And all of you are doing the same prayer, the same motions, and you're in front of your Creator. And the Creator, as Muslims, we don't believe that He's a human being. We believe that the Creator is the one who creates the human being. So we don't know what He looks like. So we can't put a face to God. And one of the problems I also had is that if you believe that God is a man, then you're going to picture Him as you picture yourself or the people that you accept. So for example, in Europe, you'll find that their representations of God is a white man. If you go to Africa, and they believe that in Christianity, that their representation of God is a black man. And in Latin America, the same thing. You'll find someone who is kind of
in between.
In between. So then that's problematic, because if you believe that God is like us, we all come in different colors and shapes and sizes, and so this in Islam, this is the beauty of Islam. The beauty of Islam is that the Creator is the Creator and we're His creation, and we should all feel that we are equal in front of Him.
Yes. Alaikum salam.
Okay, so what I'm about to say, I hope it comes out the best way, but with regards to like this event, it being like a connection and dialogue between Latino and Muslim, I know a big narrative within the Latino community. I was not myself, but like a lot of it is like, immigration, first generation born in America, go to college and things like that. So I was seeing like reserving for like Latino Muslims to kind of be involved in that narrative that they have as a way to give dawah or something like that. Like, I went to a lot of college prep programs and a lot of different things along the lines of immigration, because I'm a first born American, getting ready for college, or just like things like that along those lines, and how, professional Latino Muslims there and their presence kind of giving them resources and, how to go about life here in America as a way to get them.
So I think, if I could just touch on that one. As many of the panelists, Brother Hernan, touched on in particular, is that, Islam and Latino Islam in America in particular, it's still very much in its infancy stage. There's a myriad of directions that we can go in terms of, different causes to advocate for, different services to provide that would help to, reach out to the Latino and Hispanic communities here. Definitely, immigration is a huge issue that I think we can easily find unity amongst the Muslim population and the Latino population, and they should be working together. I know specifically there's an organization in Chicago called IMAN, Inner City Muslim Action Network, and one of the big issues that they have found unity between immigrant populations that aren't Muslim with the Muslim community is this idea of immigration. And they've held rallies downstate in Springfield, Illinois, and things like that, and advocated on behalf and supported different politicians and things like that that were more open to this idea of immigration. So definitely, I would say that is a huge area that we could be, building bridges and making connections. So if that's something that, within here, the University of Maryland or any of these other universities, I think that would be something to raise with UMMAH and with the MSA and other, Muslim organizations, and making those connections with the Latino organizations that are here on campus and other, organizations, Asian organizations, African organizations, any organizations that deal with this idea of immigration. I think that would be, a very powerful way for us to make some connections, definitely. Brother Mujahid. I can start.
Just wanted to touch on one of the first question you mentioned about the Latino Muslims in America. PBS did a report, and they said that the Hispanic Latino Muslim is the largest growing Muslim in America, and it's the fastest growing group of people in America. And just by mentioning that, if anyone here would like a free copy of Spanish or English, Chinese, we have available. Fortunately, they're not here right now. Or if you want more information about Islam, why Islam provides that free for inshallah. So you can see sister up there. She has resources.
And one of the things, maybe to conclude, and then as we leave, obviously you can ask us questions on the way out. We have also Helping Hands here, and they're a Muslim relief organization And one of the things, as I mentioned before, with the immigrant population really starting to make connections, they're raising funds for the earthquake that's happened in Ecuador. And so they're here also, they wanted to just speak briefly to try to solicit for your support in that regard as well. So you're starting to see that, Muslims really making a difference. And this is a message more for the Muslims that are here than our people of other faith that are our guests here as well, is that, we need to be making a difference and going out there and advocating and serving, doing our duty as Muslims in this society. And one of those duties is to take care of those in greatest need. So we really do appreciate helping hands to come out. We'll give you, 1 minute at the end, inshallah, before we close, to be able to just, again, ask for some support from everybody and to spread the word about that cause as well. Last question, and then before we conclude, inshallah. Alaikum salam.
Because I feel like the Latino community, more than other African community in America, is very family-oriented and religion-oriented. So, for example, for us college students who have Latinos coming up to us or any other background that's interested in the religion, sometimes, due to this increase in knowledge and all this information, all this inaccurate information all over the place, some of us students or some of us Muslims, we're faced with very difficult questions.
Sure.
That we don't know the answer to, or we don't even know how to begin to answer. And the Latino who's interested in Islam, who has a question, coming from a very religious-oriented background, he's always looking for explanation, always looking for some information. So they do their background research and they read things they don't like, or things that I guess they can't resonate with from the beginning. So how do we, as college students or young Muslims without the knowledge, how do we go about trying to explain that or trying to further the narrative?
The best advice that I can give you is, as young Muslims, you have to educate yourself about Islam. The deen started with knowledge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wrote in the Quran, Iqra. And there was a reason why he began it with read. Because the deen is based on knowledge. This religion is based on knowledge. And I'm not saying you have to be a scholar. I'm not saying you have to, be a khatib and give sermons on Fridays or anything, but you have to understand the basics of Islam so that you can share that with your Latino neighbor. And the reason why I mention that is you don't have to be a scholar, but you should know the basics. Is I was in the shoes of your Latino friend. As a young Latino in college, I was fortunate enough to have a friend who knew the basics about Islam and was able and confident enough to share with me the message of Islam, regardless of the negativity that was going on. And I don't know if you were here before, but I accepted Islam on 9/11, on September 11th, that day, and he didn't hold anything back, regardless of what was going on. But he had a basic understanding about what Islam was, and he was able to just share it with me. So for me, and the young Muslims that are here, I definitely encourage for you to study and read, and learn about your deen, for your sake as well. And so that way, when your Latino friend comes to you and asks you about it, you can share Islam with him. You can share what the message of Islam is with him with confidence. There's going to be times where you're not going to be able to answer every single question, but that's when you direct them in the right direction, either to a student who knows more, an imam on campus, or a chaplain on campus, or an imam at the masjid. Obviously, there's always a resource that you can go to, but I definitely believe that each and everyone, even myself, we should all read and learn more about Islam so that we can have the confidence and the knowledge base to be able to share with them this message, inshallah.
And just to touch on that also, I think besides your own growth in knowledge. The Prophet, Allah sent also prophets from amongst their own people. So as you gain in knowledge and you're, befriending people and teaching them and, answering whatever questions you can, there's a wisdom in that God sent prophets from amongst their own people, because they understood the culture, they understood the needs, they understood the issues, they understood all those, the language, those family issues, all that kind of, like for example, my family were more upset not with the religious change, but that some family issues would be different, so that was more of an issue, right? So, which may be unique to Latino culture versus other people who become Muslim. So besides getting your own personal knowledge, finding those connections, whether they be online, like with Islam in Spanish or Hablamos Islam or some of these other resources, having the material and having them be able to connect with Latino Muslims so that maybe some of those questions that they have are more directly linked to their personal experience, their personal cultural experience, and they can help them out, on some of those more social, personal things as opposed to just the religious, aspect of things as well.
I was going to respond that in that regard, there is extant information. I myself, I'm a writer as well as I teach, but I write in some of the local tabloids and have been published like in different magazines that are there, and also was an editor with the Muslim Link, and that if you're familiar with it, that is a medium, that's an apparatus, one of them, but it's become a very powerful tool. So you look toward publications that are extant, that are existing, that where people have done the research that provides that connection, especially in the Latino genre, in terms of what the background has been in terms of the experience in the diaspora, the diversity of the people, the language as being a media for information, because language is in fact a media for information. So there's a lot of information. There are videos and different things, good ones. I'm saying, you also do, as the brother was suggesting, that you put it through the litmus test. You look for good publications and things that are solid and that are verifiable, which they are there. And you have to have that willingness and encouragement to find that information, and this helps to verify facts. And those facts are what helps to build bridges in terms of taking a person to there. Some years ago, many years ago, in fact, it's over 4 decades, there was a poem that I once came across, and in Spanish, and it was entitled Despierta. Despierta, borinqueña, es la hora de levantar. Despierta de ese sueño, es la hora de luchar. And what it meant is, wake up. Wake up. The hour. Get up, rise up, and wake up from the dream. Like come into the reality of what the struggle is, and wake up, because it's the hour to fight. And that fight, that struggle, a person, when they want to know that spiritual, what their spiritual being is, what their foundation, in particular if they're pursuing, like we were, pursuing to know those answers, there is information, once again, which can give them the root of that understanding. Much of it, at least from my side opinion, is from the roots, from the historical roots. And as Brother Jose was saying, and also our other panelists were saying, a lot of that is based in history, and then of course self-discovery occurs with that, and one can find oneself within that midst, and also can also understand one's identity better. And if they want to really truly find out the reality, they will dig for that, inshallah.
Can I add just one more thing? And just on top of increasing your own knowledge, you'll have people have more of an impact when based on the way you treat people too.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge thing. And I don't want to. I don't mean to come off as a discouragement. Oh man, I got to go study and I got to become a scholar. But if you can just treat them right, I mean, a lot of people will accept Islam simply by the way you treat them. I think that's probably the biggest thing as well. If we as Muslims treat our neighbors the way we're supposed to treat our neighbors, a lot more people would probably embrace Islam, or at least be allies to Islam. And you learn that from the numerous examples of the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, the way he was with his neighbors, even when they outlashed against him, the patience that he had, the kindness that he had. And I'm actually doing a paper right now on Islamic misconceptions and the means of how to refute certain misconceptions that people have. And one of the things, and I'm actually basing it on the Hispanic thought on Islam. And one of them that I'm talking, one of the points that I'm making was that Islam promotes kindness and generosity and treating people the way they really want to be treated, and that was a means for many people embracing Islam. So when you're interacting with Latinos, we're very loving people, and and I think if you also reciprocate that as well, that mutual respect, that love, and you overextend it, it'll make it easier for the ears and heart to be open once you're ready to just throw a little tidbit about what Islam is. I think that's a big thing, and I want to just also add that to the component of knowledge as well.
So it is time for prayer. Sister Wendy, was there any last statement that you'd like to make? We've been talking a lot.
About that, I was, as he was speaking, I was thinking about my own experience. My friend that I had in high school, she never talked to me about what Islam was. She never wanted to convert me or anything like this. It was always me just observing her and observing her family and observing what they did. And my curiosity just kept growing and growing just by looking at how they would act and what they would do. And I remember she even took me to the masjid. When I went to my other friend's church, the first thing that her father did was come to me and say, do you accept this? Do you accept that Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior? Say yes or no. And then afterwards he put some oil on my head, and it was like, whoa, I just got here and let me sit down. But my friend's family, when I would go I actually did visit a mosque before I accepted Islam. They took me with them, and they would take me to some, Muslim gatherings as well. But it was always like, oh, just come and you can sit in the back if you want. You don't have to join us in prayer, and you don't have to, And they would excuse themselves, and I would be more like, no, I want to know, I want to learn, I want to sit with you, and I want to pray with you, I want to experience this whole thing. So a lot of times, it's just people want to know about Islam just because they would like to educate themselves, and they see Islam as something foreign. And the best thing is to just, facilitate the information if they want it, but never to push anyone, because that's not our job. Our job is to have our relationship with our Creator, and then just be the best Muslims that we can be, and that's going to reflect on our, the people around us as well.
Thank you, everybody. We'll be closing now.